Good afternoon. My name is Horst Stipp. I'm with the ARF, and I've been very active in the ARF's Neuro Standards Collaboration Project. And we are talking here now with one of the participants, a scientist who has a company that does that kind of research. It's Richard Silberstein. He encouraged me to pronounce his name with a proper German accent, and having been here for a little while, I find it difficult to make the switch. But Herr Silberstein, Richard, the company is Neuro Insight. Neuro Insight is originally located in Melbourne,
Australia,
but now has expanded to New York.
New York, London.
And I know you're active worldwide because I recently talked to a colleague of mine who invited me to speak in Germany in a couple of weeks. And he told me that they've done work with you. It's the IP agency in Cologne.
Right. Yes, the media work. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, we know each other from the Neuro Insights process, from the retreat in Philadelphia, and some other discussion that we had. And I think what's particularly interesting about your work is that at first glance, people may want to put you in a box and saying, well, they're doing this EEG research. Yeah. But you developed a different kind of methodology, and I would love you to talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, I should explain by background. By background, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a PhD in neuroscience. I'm also actually a professor of neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience. And my interest was to develop technology because my first degree was in physics. So I combined the interest in neuroscience and physics, and I was interested in developing a technology to track rapid changes in brain activity. And the methodology that we developed, which we call steady state topography, uses the brain's electrical activity, EEG, but it's not EEG. It's what's called an evoked potential technique. What we mean by that is part of the technology is people wear these goggles, and in the periphery there's this faint visual flicker, and that's like a reference signal. And we're able to measure that reference signal in other parts of the brain and measure the speed with which different parts of the brain operate. And the speed is related unambiguously to the activity. EEG, we found, was not clear-cut, did not give us clear-cut information on whether the activity in a part of the brain was going up or going down, because sometimes the EEG can go up and that means the brain activity goes up, but sometimes it can mean the EEG goes up and the brain activity goes down. So sometimes it's a bit ambiguous. So I was interested in a technology which is not so ambiguous, which gives you a direct insight, and that's by the steady state topography measures the speed, and that's very closely related to the activity. Now you might say, so what's so good about activity? Why do you need activity? And the answer is because different parts of the brain do different things, they specialize in different functions. If you know the activity in different parts of the brain, you can infer the psychological state. Because when you do brain measurement, you're not interested in brain measurement, you're interested in consumer psychology. So what you want to do is to translate brain activity into consumer psychology. But you have to know what the activity is. So that's why we set on SST as our technology of choice. It enables us to focus on specific responses associated with the cognition, thoughts and feelings in a much more sensitive way. So we can look at just one response to an ad, for example, and get an accurate measure.
So one of the things that's often said about neuroscience and its application to marketing, that even researchers like me who've been in the field for very, very long, this is pretty new and it sounds very, very complex and difficult. So let's try to clarify it a little bit more. You're the only company who uses this particular approach, because I think
that's right.
Is it right to say that you invented it?
Yes, I did. Yeah, it's patented.
And you mentioned earlier that you use goggles.
That's right.
And of course, I've known your methodology, so I've actually seen it.
Yeah.
One of the issues that's discussed and some of your colleagues have raised or sort of emphasize is that, like my technology is portable or non-invasive. What is your point of view on that with regard to the goggles?
Oh, okay.
You've tested that.
There are probably two issues here. One is, what are the every technology has advantages and disadvantages. It's as simple as that. We our technology requires a controlled environment. So, for example, when we're looking at shop front or out-of-door advertising, we tend to use virtual reality or films, for example, rather than having people actually walk around, because we think actually that actually controls things a little bit better. But certainly, the SST technology does not cannot be used in, say, outdoor environments, for example. So those are probably one of the main things. It's also, at this stage, not really portable. We have people sitting down, so that's probably another issue. But on the other hand, its advantages is its extreme sensitivity to the elements of brain activity that are relevant to psychology. So we are the only ones who have published our peer-reviewed work on being able to measure what parts of an advertisement go into long-term memory. The sort of memory which things have to go into that memory if they're going to have any effect on your behavior and your attitudes in the future. And there are certain regions of the brain around here which become active when an experience is going to go into long-term memory. And we can measure that, and what we find is that that is closely related to the level of advertising effectiveness when you look at the level of memory encoding for either the key message or the branding. So, in a sense, all methodologies, as you say, have their strengths and their weaknesses. We feel that SST has particular advantages, particularly in areas such as advertising research and specifically the issue of memory and emotion in relation to advertising.
Do you use your methodology in connection with eye tracking, or do you think that's not necessary because you capture that?
We think for advertising work we don't recommend eye tracking. Where we think eye tracking is most relevant, product development, for example, where you want to actually literally see, or usability, for example, or web design, for example, are the sorts of things that are probably of most relevance. But what we find is that with normal viewing, there's a sort of a gestalt principle. So even though your attention is focused on here, we know from neuroscience and from a lot of other research that things that are not necessarily the focus of your attention still go into long-term memory and have an effect on behavior. So, as I said, in certain areas we feel that the eye tracking is probably not so important. Okay. So we focus more on the gestalt input.
Well, I think we have a good or better understanding of the methodology and the complexity, and you touched on the advantages and disadvantages and the kind of issues that you look for. So let's kind of, you said something earlier which resonated, which is, we're not doing this to study neuroscience, but marketing applications.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people would be really interested in maybe some of the findings that you have that are surprising, unusual. Yeah. It would be particularly interesting if you could maybe point to some of the findings where you'd say, this is something that I don't think I could have found out with an ordinary technology methodology. This is something that I think really was possible to uncover because of the kind of methodology we use.
Okay, probably the best way to answer that, Horst, is to just step back and say, probably one of the most important things that we found from our methodology, if you will, is what we seem to indicate is the most relevant metric for effectiveness, the neuro metric of effectiveness, which is memory encoding for key message or branding. And by the way, when I say memory, it doesn't just mean, oh, I know what's in my memory, all I have to do is think and it's there. No. Most of the memories which affect your behavior are what are called implicit memories.
Right.
These are the unconscious memories. So we can measure what's going in, irrespective whether it is conscious or unconscious. In fact, sometimes conscious or explicit memories become implicit over time. So once you can actually measure that metric, you can then see the things that influence it. And some of them you wouldn't have guessed. For example, what we have found is, for example, that little things can have a huge effect on the effectiveness of an ad. Let me give you one example. Body language.
Right.
We did one study with for a major department store, and at the end of the department store, it was mainly a model wearing different things, looking very attractive, etc. And then at the very end, they said, there's no other store like the department store. Just at that time, the model looked into the camera. You know that supermodel look, you know, the sort of,
yeah, a little bit too serious.
Yeah, it's sort of arrogant. What are you looking at? You know, that sort of. Anyway, when that happened, there was a huge, from the brain activity, withdrawal response.
Okay,
from the female, and the memory encoding went boom. Just when the branding information was going, that look from the supermodel killed the effectiveness of that ad.
So there was a strong emotional reaction.
There was a strong emotional reaction.
In the way of a cognitive.
And the memory process went clunk, just for that particular point. That's one example where what we found, we wouldn't expect. We showed that ad to some of the really good creators and researchers, and we say, okay, can you tell does anything about this ad strike you? Any comments, etc.? And they'll look at it. Oh, it's okay. That look from the supermodel only lasted less than a second, but it had a huge impact.
So, did they take your advice?
Yes.
Did they reshoot it?
Yes. And
did
from then
you
on,
retest it then? Did they let you retest it?
They wanted to go straight to market.
Oh, okay.
But we have got examples where, this is another one which we wouldn't have known. There's a very interesting phenomenon which we've discovered called, memory phenomenon called conceptual closure. When the brain thinks that there's the end of a particular piece of experience, it processes the experience in lumps, in quanta. And when there's the end of one experience, there's a busy sign goes up and the brain processes the information. It lasts for just a second or two, just a short time. But anything which says this is the end, the brain says, okay, I got it, I'll process, now back in business. We had a financial services company, a big bank, come to us, and they had a campaign going out, and it was a holding campaign, and it just consisted of a series of geometrical shapes moving around the screen and a voiceover and text. And they asked us to evaluate, and what we found was that right near the end, one of the circles got bigger and bigger and bigger and took over the screen. And when that happened, the memory went down. And that was just when they were delivering the key message about a particular financial product. It was just there. We saw it with the 30-second version of the ad. We saw it with the 15-second version of the ad. We saw it with clients. We saw it with non-clients. It was so we advised the bank. We said, look, you've got a problem with this one here. This particular part of the message is not going to go in. So they said, look, we didn't have time. We'll make the change, but this one has gone to market, has already gone, and it is being aired. So it was aired for 3 months. And then they re-edited it, and they put the new version that we recommended. And it was exactly the same ad, except at the end, instead of the circle going, whoop, the circle just stayed the same size. Nothing else. Nothing else changed. Now, when they did the tracking, and this was done independently by another company whose name I won't mention, the first 3 months, the one we said they got a problem, the spontaneous recall for the key message at the time where the memory encoding was that dip that we said they had a problem, they never had this result before. You know what it was? 0%. 0% recall. They had never had 0% recall.
Yeah, that's quite an achievement.
They've never had 0. Okay, they then, 3 months later, they aired the revised version of the ad, and it went up to 18%, which is okay, just. They prefer 18 to 24%. But that was a very, very small effect. We said, listen, all you've got to do is either don't give the appearance, or sometimes shift the position of a message when it occurs. In the Neuro Standards trial, there were some interesting examples where at the end of an ad there was high encoding, and then there was a change and something occurred, and you could see memory encoding went boom. And that's when they were delivering a message. And we said, look, try to deliver that message ahead of time. This conceptual closure is not bad. It's just the way the brain processes information. So those are sorts of things that we're discovering. But finally, one of the really interesting things that we hadn't seen before is how powerful the media effect is on the ads. The way the media, the program, and the ads they can fight or they can work together. And we measure a thing called the neuro state, which is this sort of stable type of process while you're viewing a program. It's the balance of left and right memory encoding, because the left hemisphere is much more concerned with detail, specific speech, facts. Right hemisphere, imagery, emotion. And the balance, there seems to be a sort of a stable balance while you're viewing. It fluctuates, but there's a mean value. If the signature, that balance for the ad and the program are the same, they work together, and the ad can improve its performance, and we know this from our metric, up to 35% better. If they fight, it can go the other way. So that's something else which would be very, very hard to measure that we've discovered, which we find interesting.
Well, thanks. In talking about these things, you mentioned the Neurostandards project that we all worked on, and the example that you gave, I think, leads me to the next question I wanted to ask you, which has to do with an issue that was raised by a lot of the scientists that reviewed the various studies. And it was in the context of the application of the sciences to marketing being pretty new, and the desire to have more science and more, especially more validation. So what is your point of view on that? I assume that's one of your concerns from listening to you.
First of all, by nature, I'm a scientist.
Right.
Okay, so to me, there are certain basic things that you have to convince yourself experimentally and others before you can make claims. And one of the things that's important for us is what is the scientific foundations, the validation for the claims that we're making. And this SST methodology, we've been publishing in the scientific and biomedical literature for the last 20, 25 years. So we've been published in high-impact, peer-reviewed journals. But more relevant here, we've published also probably the only finding showing the relationship between a change in brand preference and memory encoding during viewing advertising. So validation by good experimental work, peer-reviewed publications is really very, very important. And the constructs that we use, engagement, memory, long-term memory, attention, approach, withdrawal, emotional intensity, these are not ones that we made up. These are based on the scientific foundations and literature that we draw on. And we have published and demonstrated our ability to measure those particular indicators. So I certainly agree there is always a need for more research, and there is always a need for development, and we are actively doing that. But we feel that there is a threshold that we believe Neuro Insight has passed to say, look, there is a level of research and foundational work which says, okay, this can be taken seriously and can be used. I can't speak for other research companies, etc. I don't know the details there. I know there's a difference in the amount of publications and the amount of the scientific basis, but all I can do is speak about our particular work. So I think that there are some comments that can be made about everything, which are sort of lowest common denominator, but you have to be careful in making those comments because the actual suppliers there are different standards, and we like to think, maybe immodestly, that we have a high level of scientific validation and publication-based validation behind us.
Well, thank you for making those opinions in that point of view clear. How long have you been working in applying your science to marketing?
You'll be surprised when I answer the question.
Yes.
I first got interested in using this in marketing in 1985, when my university started a small startup company to exploit it. At that stage, I don't think the industry was interested. Some of the responses we got from agencies was, what's the brain got to do with advertising?
No kidding.
Well, if they say, yeah, that's
Well,
true.
times have changed.
It's amazing how much things have changed. Right. So we've been in this area for a long time.
But so it would be correct to say that it really has sort of exploded in the last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, the attitude has changed tremendously.
And I think part of that also has to do with the fact that the the hardware that you can use now, and then of course the automatic approaches.
Yeah.
One last question is, a lot of your work is on commercials, correct?
Yep.
Have you also done work on movie trailers?
Yes, we're doing work. We have done work on movie trailers, and we are doing work on movie trailers now. We've also done work on packaging as well. We've done work on outdoor advertising, out of home and outdoor advertising, and of course we've done a lot of work on in media as well. So
when you say media, my question was in fact, you think that the method, let's say the method that you employ, works even like, let's say, exposing people to a 40-minute TV show or so, or do you think?
We've done work with that. We've looked at things like, for example, talent testing, where we have different. Yes. We've done pilot testing of television programs, what's working, etc. For entertainment, long-term memory is not the most important measure. For entertainment, the most important measure is engagement.
That makes sense.
The sense of person, and what we mean by engagement is activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with a sense of personal relevance. That's what we mean by engagement. And we find that the engagement measure is the most relevant and important one for entertainment work.
So finally, in those discussions, I think there was a consensus that you, I don't want to put words in your mouth though, and your colleagues said that we do recommend, for example, when you do commercial testing, not to throw out your old methods, but use this as an additional input to work together. Is that something that you support?
Yes and no.
Okay, now that's a good answer. We need to hear more about that.
Let me explain. If the reason you want to do traditional research and neuro, because you're not really confident in either, so you want to do one so that they support, you're not sure whether it's right, that's not the reason you should be combining the two. That's the first one. Traditional methods have their strengths. We also know they have their weaknesses. And the reason that we are here, the reason that there's a neuro standards trial, is because there is a recognition that the traditional methods have enormous weakness. Look, anyone working in the industry knows there are, yes, even you know, there are classic cases where an ad has bombed in testing and yet has gone on to be spectacularly successful in the market, or vice versa.
Probably more often vice versa.
That's right. It's not exceptional cases, but there are many cases where campaign things that have been very successful, which have been subsequently tested, have proved not to test well. The Cadbury's Gorilla campaign in the UK is a classic. There are many here as well. The point is that neuro and traditional research each have their particular strengths.
Right.
What neuro is very good at, our version of neuro, I can't speak about other people's version, okay? What our version of we believe is good at is telling you what is really happening inside. But on its own, the graphs won't tell you why. The traditional methods are the ones who if you need to know why, sometimes the context tells you, but maybe in-depth interview. We recommend the best way to do the combined work is to use neuro first, and then use the results from neuro to guide either the quant or the qual research. So when you see a peak or a trough, why is that peak there? Why is that trough there? Then you can basically focus on that. And our experience both in Australia, in the UK, in Germany, has been that approach is very productive because it draws on the strengths of both areas. The trouble with the traditional research methods, it tries to answer two questions. One question is what's really happening, and the second question is why. The problem is people are very bad at knowing what's really going on in here, verbally or by symbolic communication. That's anything. Twiddling a dial, writing a piece of paper, all of them are very imperfect at understanding what is really going on in there. So we recommend the neuro and that going together, and traditional going together. And in some cases, neuro has actually identified a question for traditional research. We did some work with a media station in Australia looking at the best television station for certain sporting events. And what we found was that when Formula One racing was on cable, the engagement was much higher than it was on free-to-air television. And we advised, we said, we think that people feel that Formula One belongs more on this cable network. They then followed it up with a traditional quant research, and that's exactly what people said. So that's where neuro actually gave them an insight to test with quant.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
Well, that was really very interesting to talk to you about the application of the science as well as the principle of science itself. But our time is up. I want to thank you very much. And it was a pleasure speaking with you, Richard. Bye-bye, everybody.